Hello, welcome to the Bakwas channel for self-paced tutorials on Internet of Things. This video illustrates deployment and configuration to monitor a UNIHIKER under Nagios Core Administration Server. UNIHIKER is the single board computer from DFRobot. Nagios is an infrastructure monitoring solution that has two distinct environments. The core, which is the public domain version as opposed to the feature-rich enterprise version, monitors the infrastructure farm. Nagios Remote Program Execution, NRPE, runs on the monitored clients to communicate with the admin server. UNIHIKER is a versatile Internet of Things solution from DFRobot. This platform will be examined in greater detail in a future presentation. There are two facets to the Nagios solution. First, the host server that administers the farm. There are two versions of this server: Core, which we are using, which is the public domain version, and Enterprise, which is a licensed version with much superior features. Our focus is limited to the core. Second, each computer that is monitored by Nagios Core operates as a client with two key components: Nagios Remote Program Execution, NRPE, that communicates with the core admin server, and plugins that perform tasks on the monitored server, such as check temperature or check load. Let us go ahead and install the Nagios Remote Program Executor, NRPE, in the UNIHIKER box. So the first thing we want to do is, of course, to create a working directory where we can bring in all the files from outside. So I'll just go ahead and, for the lack of imagination, just use Nagios as the name, and then change my directory to that working directory. It's empty. And now the next step, which is classic Linux, is you go ahead and make sure that all your installed packages are updated. So run the update command, and let's ignore the 404 because we're on Buster, and after Buster there was Bullseye, and now the current one is Bookworm. So I don't know when DFRobot will get around to making the latest Bookworm available for UNIHIKER, perhaps never at all, but so we have to stick with Buster for our present installation. Once we've done that, we will install the requisite packages. So these packages are required. Some are already installed. Some you may not want to use, like the firewall, for example, but I've got all of them installed. And now we're ready to go ahead and download the NRPE package. The NRPE package is available at GitHub under the Nagios Enterprise repository, and it's under NRPE, of course. Before we do anything, let's just go ahead and look at the latest version number, which is 4.1.1, and that's the release version. It's just a few months old. And we'll go ahead and select the hyperlink for the download because we will use the wget command to bring it into our working folder. So now that we know that the latest version is 4.1.1 and we've copied the link to the clipboard, let's just use wget to bring it in to our current folder here. So the output will be written to this file, and we'll go ahead and download it, and it's done. Again, just for the sake of the demonstration, let's verify it's there, right? So we need to unzip it, and we'll go ahead and use the tar command for that purpose. So apply that, and now that's done. Again, verify for the purposes of this demonstration only that we do have a folder now, NRPE-4.1.1, where the files have been unarchived. So we go over there, NRPE-4.1.1, and let's look at that. So you can see there's a whole bunch of files in there. So let's prepare the configuration by using the configure command. So it's .configure, and it'll just go ahead and validate some of the settings for the compiler and create the CMake file that we need to use for compiling. And I'm going to stop capturing the video right now because this is going to take a long time. So now we are reaching the end of the configure operation. The make file has been created. So let's go ahead and compile and build the binaries. And the command is make, and there are a series of options available, but since this is the first time we are running it on UNIHIKER, my recommendation would be we just say make all. Later on, when we have to build separate individual ones, we can choose make NRPE or make check underbar NRPE or make install, make plugin, a whole bunch of different options, but let's play it safe and ensure that we build everything. So we do a make all, and it's going to go through and compile the code and build the binaries. And then before we install the binaries, we will go ahead and create user groups, configuration files, and service definitions. So now that the compile is finished, let's go ahead and create the user and group. And the user in the group is the same as just Nagios, but we'll just use this command that's available for us to do it. And it's already there, so it just echoes that back quickly. So now we've got to go ahead and install the binaries, and we need elevated privileges for that. So sudo make install, and that's done. Then we go ahead and install the configuration files, and that too requires elevated privileges. So we'll go ahead and do that. Sudo make install config, and now we can start the service by first of all making the binaries for it. So go ahead and do that, and then we enable the service, and we will shortly start it. So the one thing that we have to do, which of course I've already done in this here, but I just want to show you, etc services, And we have to define the port number for the NRPE, which is 5666. So I've gone ahead and done that. And you can see I've made an entry NRPE 56 TCP. And of course, the comment is optional. So that is done in /etc/services, and it requires elevated privileges. So this part, which is the NRPE installation, is done. But there are a whole list of utility programs called plugins that we need to install. And for that, we need to move on to the second phase of this installation. Now that we have installed the primary components for NRPE on UNIHIKER, and including the services, we will not start the service until we've installed what are known as plugins, NRPE plugins. These are the essential components that run and support Nagios through the host machines. Nagios plugins are available at the GitHub site that I'm showing on the screen in here, and I'll post the link in the description to the tutorial. The latest version is 2.4.1, and we will again use wget to download the tar files and unzip them and then go ahead with the installation. The installation this time will be much quicker. So let's go ahead and copy the link and save it for our use. And then we will go back to the terminal and proceed with the installation of the NRPE plugins. There are no prerequisites since we've installed all the prerequisites during the NRPE installation. But let's back up one hierarchy on the folder level so that we can create the appropriate folder at the right level. So the command for this is shown here. And as we saw previously, it was 2.4.12. So let me clear the screen and then start the download. So as you can see, I'm still outputting to a separate folder in here, and I'll go ahead and run it. And that's done. So let's go ahead and verify for demonstration purposes. Yes, sure enough, we have that file. So let's unzip it. And once that's done, we can verify again for demonstration purposes that we do have this file in here, which are the plugins. So let me go ahead and change over to that folder. And now we can see that we have the standard configuration files, and I'll run the configuration. It didn't run it for some reason. Some of the recommended prerequisites are listed here, and just as a precaution, I'm going to go ahead and install them, or demonstrate at least the installation for the ones that are not installed. And once that's done, we'll move over to the installation of the NRPE plugins. So now that the prerequisites have been installed, I'll just show you there is a folder called Tools, which is listed in here, and it has a setup file that we need to run. So we'll go ahead and type tools/setup, and that is going to create the .configure file for our use. So now that the file has been created, let's go ahead and run it. in the same fashion as we did for the main NRPE build. And this is not going to take very long. And once that's done, we will use the standard make all instead of going through the individual make options. So we're almost there. I'm capturing all the details in here simply to give you an idea of how long it'll take for the plugins to be ready for compilation and build. So now that our make file is ready, Let's just go ahead and run make with the all option instead of trying to be too granular with all the other options in there. So this will go pretty fast because there's a limited number of plugins to be compiled and built. So once this is complete, then we will use the sudo make install command to install whatever is necessary for the plugins. So now that the compile and build is complete, let's go ahead and install the plugins. And with elevated privileges, we just say build install, and it's done. So as you know, we've installed the NRPE service, and I just want to show you here whether the service is running or not. And you can see that it couldn't find anything with the netstat command, and that is because we haven't started our service, and we now need to install the service and initialize it, which we've already done previously. So we want to just start it. So let's go ahead and start the service. So sudo ctl. And so we've started the service. Let's verify if it's running. And sure enough, now you can see netstat is telling us it's listening. And 5666, okay. The next step is to tweak the NRPE configuration file so that the UNIHIKER can respond to queries from the Nagios host. And we will move into the configuration file folder first, which is cd/user/local/nagios/etc. There is only one file in here, and you can see it's nrpe.cfg. We need elevated privileges to edit this, so let's go ahead and do that. And let me scroll down to the key places where we need to make the changes. So the first change is, of course, to identify the Nagios host. And in my case, my Nagios host is what I'm typing in here, and in your case, it perhaps could be different. Also, I have a tendency to change this don't blame NRPE to 1. It's up to you whether you want to change it or not. A connection timeout 300 is important because, as I'll explain to you in a minute, when we check for updates, sometimes it does take a long time. And so here we have a place where a list of standard preset commands in there, and I'm just going to go ahead and place my own variations to these. Some minor variations in the warning and the critical settings. Nothing significant. You can tweak these based on your own personal preferences, and we'll go ahead and then paste in my settings that I've already previously saved, and I use it across all my IoT devices. So I'm going to cut and paste the ones that I commonly use for my own configuration in here. And let me just paste it in here and then we'll go through it. So we have the check users, and I've said warning if there are more than 5 users, give it a warning. 10 users, then probably something is wrong on your UNIHIKER. The two key ones that I want to point out that I've added are the check NTP time. So that allows me to keep the UNIHIKER in sync and any discrepancies or variations in the time clock. And then, of course, to check for updates and upgrades. Now, no, we're in Buster, and this is kind of a little meaningless test, but nevertheless, if you're running NRPE in your own environment for other IoT devices other than UNIHIKER, I think it's a very important consideration to have. So let's go ahead and exit out of here. And we've saved the file, and now we know that it's running. So let's go ahead and restart the service. And so we're essentially done at this stage in setting it up. The other thing that we want to do is look at where the plugins are kept. And the plugins are kept in this folder in here, and you can see there's a long list of plugins. And we can just check for one of these, for example, check ATP, or APT rather. And you can see it'll go out. And this is the one that takes a little longer than usual, and sometimes NRPE times out. But as you can see here, it returns a response that says in the critical updates. Similarly, for check NTP time, I think we have NTP and as well as NTP. Yeah. So I'd rather use NTP. And we specify a host. In my case, it is uspool.ntp.org, right? And it'll go ahead and figure out and come back with the data. This is what Nagios is going to collect and display on its dashboard. And I'll show you shortly how we do that. So this wraps up the installation of the NRPE support files, the client files, NRPE check, and the plugins on the UNIHIKER. Then we will now move on to the Nagios host, where I need to install a configuration file for the UNIHIKER so that Nagios knows what to collect from the UNIHIKER. Each IoT device can have its own set of services to be monitored, or it can be across the board. If you're using a common popular like Raspberry Pi, you can have a common set of config files and just declare them to be clients of a host group. And then, just in one simple command or set of commands, you can monitor your entire farm. But for UNIHIKER, it's going to be slightly different. And I'll go ahead and step over to that session right now. Now that we've installed the NRPE and the plugins on the UNIHIKER, let's move over to the Nagios core admin server and take a look at what we have to do there to connect Nagios to the UNIHIKER. Here I'm showing you a little diagram of the arrangement. The remote Linux Unix host represents the UNIHIKER, where we've installed NRPE and we've installed a couple of plugins. The two examples here are check disk and check load. We're going to now move over to the Nagios admin server and look at what's required there for configuration purposes to connect to the monitoring services for the UNIHIKER. So after we log in to the Nagios core admin server, let's move over to the folders where the Nagios configuration files are kept for the individual servers that are being monitored. So CD, your installation may be slightly different, but here I'm just going to show you that it's in C local Nagios, since there are two versions of Nagios, one from Nagios Enterprise Core, and then the other one, the Community Edition. So under Nagios, we have a folder called ETC, where the majority of the files for configuration are kept, and we have a folder called CONFD. Now, these names are not important, they're just convention, and under CFD, you'll see I have a bunch of folders based on different roles. So there are three at the tail end of the list: IoT, servers, and services. So for each server that is being monitored, you require a config file. And I'll first go into servers just to show you what I have for the Raspberry Pis. Okay, so here you can see for each individual Raspberry Pi and Pi Zeros and others, we have individual CFG files. So for the UNIHIKER, I've kept it in the folder called IoT. And you see that there are two files here. There is a unihiker.cfg and there is a unihiker1.cfg. So unihiker1 represents the single physical instance of the UNIHIKER, and unihiker CFG represents what we call a host group, which defines the collection of the UNIHIKERs. So first, let's look at the unihiker1.cfg. And again, I'm not going to be in sudo mode, so it'll just give me a warning about the file not being editable, and that's exactly what I want. So some of the key properties that we have to define is, of course, the host name. and I'm calling it UNIHIKER. The alias is optional. The second important point is the fully qualified domain name or IP address. You could use an IP address here also. And unihiker1.parkcircus.org represents my fully qualified domain name. Then there is a basic command to detect whether it's up or down, and for that we have something called check host alive that Nagios will run. The check interval, check period are kind of important properties in case you want to have granularity. If not, it'll assume the global defaults. And then I've got a couple of other optional ones that are not really very important, but if you choose, you can have your own icon image, for example, etc. So that's essentially it to define a host client server for being monitored by Nagios. Now this is a single UNIHIKER. If I had more UNIHIKERs, I would, in my naming convention, probably name it as unihiker2.cfg or unihiker3.cfg. So that's the individual configuration file. And then you may ask, what is this unihiker.cfg? So let's go and take a look at that. Unihiker.cfg. Again, these names are not important, but just to rationalize and keep it same. So you can see I'm calling the host group UNIHIKER without any numerical digit or suffix. And then the member, since I have only one now, I'm telling it that it's UNIHIKER1. And if I had more, that's put a comma. And then, of course, you can continue on the next line if you use a backslash character. So essentially, that's it. UNIHIKER.cfg represents the collection of UNIHIKERs. And UNIHIKER1 is specific to the single instance of UNIHIKER. Right? And once you've done all this, it's always a good idea to ensure that your Nagios is configured properly to run without any errors at runtime. And for that, I have a very simple shell script that I just run, and I call it Nagios verify.sh, and it basically it's my typing mistake. And so basically all it does is runs through all the checks and tells me that there are no errors, and then I can go ahead and deploy the changes or update the runtime service. So essentially what I've done here, if I go back to my original drawing, and I can show you. So in this particular session, I showed you how unihiker1.cfg was configured and how I created a host group called unihiker.cfg, and these files reside in the Nagios core admin server. So now we'll move on and take a look at how the monitoring is going on. So to do that, we just move over to our host group in here and home page. So you can see this is the landing page for the Nagios core server, and it gives us a bunch of selections on the left nav bar. You can look at it by host groups, you can look at it by service groups, and I'll do both. So if I go to host groups, remember I had called it unihiker.cfg. That is the host group, and under that I have only one host server now, UNIHIKER1. And so let's go and click on host groups, and let's ignore all these other things that are in there because they're just simply noise, and drill down to UNIHIKER. So here we have UNIHIKER set up. That's the name of the host group. And here is the server that I'm trying to monitor. And you can see all services are running. It's okay. And then I can check current users, current load, HTTP, and all these things that I didn't have to do explicitly. I simply assigned them to a group of host services which is running under Raspberry Pi. So there are some interesting things that can be done. If I click on load, you can see it gives me a whole bunch of information about the current load. And I'm not going to get too much into this, but there are ways of logging all this and looking at the performance data over a period of time. And I hope that some of you get interested in that. The other one is service groups. We just did host groups and service groups. I can just look at all the services that I have. And in this case, you'll see that UniHiker is no longer in a separate group. It's under RPI services. And that is why it was so easy for me to get all those checks done, because they all belong part of RPI services. And I just tagged on UniHiker in there. So if I go in there and you take a look at it, you can see that I now have the same information available. So I went through it through host groups or service groups. And obviously, there are errors and the colors will change. For example, let me just go ahead and show you one here. So there are kinds of things where you can say it's unknown or it's critical. So if I go and look here at what's critical, you can see that the swap file, there's nothing free. I need to go and look into that a little bit. And then, of course, there are upgrades pending on this server. So I hope this has been useful to show you how UniHiker can be monitored through using Nagios. In this short presentation, demonstrated using UniHiker for the monitoring of Linux clients for IoT devices. And we also configured files on the Nagios core server to monitor these clients. That's all, folks. Thanks for taking the time to view this presentation. Would love to hear from you with your feedback. You're always welcome to be critical in any which way you can. Until next time, bye for now. This presentation was prepared with assistance from free open source software, FOSS, for the backbone of the preparation of this video, using Debian, Inkscape, OBS Studio, Kdenlive, LibreOffice, and of course, Ubuntu. Teachers, viewers, and peers provided valuable feedback. My apologies if I have inadvertently omitted anyone from this acknowledgement. A very big thank you to y'all for the assistance.